Turner most certainly will always be, for me, the greatest watercolourist that ever lived, the greatest landscape painter that ever lived, and probably the greatest artist, per se, for other artists. He was born in Maiden Lane in Covent Garden in 1775 on St George's Day. His father, William Turner, was a hairdresser, and Turner lived and worked as a little boy in his father's shop as a lather boy. He earned a precarious living as a child artist in drawing the many customers his father did wigs for. And of course, being primarily a watercolourist and studying in the house of Dr. Munro with Gertin and Luthenberg and cousins and so on, of an evening to earn half a crown, a lot of money then. Munro was a neurologist and a philanthropist, and he learned his craft via other masters. They copied them, and bounced off, he and Gertin bounced off into the world of commerce, actually, as commercial artists. Very difficult work, travelling extensively on horseback with a pack horse through Yorkshire and Wales and so on. And then from the early days of the watercolourist, in which he became a supreme master of the world and returned to it in his old age, he encompassed every form of art known, the graphic arts. He was a poet. He may not have been a very good one, but he was no E. Cummings, but he certainly could bang out the fallacies of hope or something. There's no doubt that his main mass of money came from engravings, of course, and then he sold paintings for enormous sums of money for the time. He had great patrons of art amongst the aristocracy, like Egremont at Petworth, and very little amongst the royalty. One of his sadnesses was that he'd never been knighted. But in his day, of course, they had, there was an enormous need and urge to get away from the ugliness of life around them. They hid themselves in their paintings, looking at them. It was an escape thing. And anyone who could paint colourfully and romantically, as he could to an incredible degree, he didn't lumber his paintings up with many figures, you see. Unlike people that try to represent heaven, who wants to go to heaven with millions of angels creeping about? So he created another world of colour, magic, mystery that people bought. Nearly every European painter, even the Italians, have been influenced by the Dutch school. And the Dutch school, because of the nature of its terrain, is very uninteresting from the point of view of, let's call it, romantic art, mountains and so on. So you have shipping, rivers, sky, the predominant thing. And the mast of the ship took the part of the trees in the forest. Turner was born and lived near the Thames most of his life. And the Thames was an enormous influence on his painting. The Fighting Temeraire was inspired by Turner whilst he was at Greenwich with another painter. And the old Temeraire was being dragged up to Deptford to be broken up. And the sad sight, this beautiful vessel being towed up, which epitomised the romanticism of sailing ships, by this ugly little tug, which represented the Industrial Revolution and the smoke and so on. And Turner made a thumbnail sketch. I believe it was on the cuff of his shirt. He was apt to do this a lot. And said, I'll paint a picture for the next Academy or whatever. He never parted with the Temeraire. He had it in the studio until he died, and always referred to it as my darling. I understand that. I'm now going to do a reverse painting of the Temeraire. This is the beginning of it. I did this about 3 years ago. I wanted to walk into a picture, and obviously you'd have to swim into the sea or the river, walk into the picture and turn around and see the chap painting it. It gives you a chance to emulate the style of the master, and the reason one does that is to learn the techniques of painting. This is about the speed he would have worked and then calmed down after and qualified the rest of the work with a brush and paint. And so he would have gone very carefully over a fixed drawing. He would have probably used boiled milk and fixed the charcoal, and then very carefully with a ruler or maul stick, drawn the masts in carefully, as most masters did, to get an accuracy for riggings, buildings, etc., knowing that eventually he would be painting in between, besides over it in parts, and this didn't matter. He was so aware of the importance of ships that you could almost build a ship from one of Turner's paintings. At this stage, we destroy much of what has been put on, and he used tempera in this fashion because the light from the canvas itself has been obliterated by a wash of ochre, and that has one prismatic effect, and this has the effect of creating another prismatic effect, but in depth, 3 dimension. So he would come up with his incredible knowledge of cloud formation and build the lights up into the picture away from the sun, although using the same colour, same intensity. He wouldn't worry about losing a mast here or there, because afterwards there's many more colours and glazes and scumbles go in between. He would then block in with different tones, sometimes using as many as 11 or 12 or 13 washes. The blocking in of a vessel, this kind of thing, should be done light in its initial stages, because after the tempera underpaintings, of course, it becomes the glazes. And if you attempt, as the Dutch did, to achieve the darks first, it isn't quite as luminous at the end of the painting as if you paint in a series of washes as quickly as possible. At this stage, he would flatten certain areas, and the main point of this is that the sun, the disc, would be probably the thickest piece of impasto, and the rest less by degree of thickness. And the colours blend as you do this, because it's an instinctive thing. One can hardly teach it. It comes from years of buttering bread and butter, I think. In my case, bread and margarine. And when this is dry, you get a better chance of the form. For the next coat, this would dry in about 10 minutes. There is no record of the Temeraire in existence, apart from Turner's painting. She was broken up at Deptford. But there are 2 engravings. One is a plan of the ship as she was being built, and the other is lying on her side in the breaker's yard as a hulk. And I got two of these from the Greenwich Museum and reconstructed it from the plans so that within reason the spars and everything is relatively accurately, the gun and so forth. This is a relatively limited palette of colours. They vary, but this is for the second or third application on the painting. In tempera, which I've freshly ground this morning, which was done in the studio practices of the ancients. I'll just grind a little more of the blue to show how it's done. It's like mixing cement and sand. You put the powder down, make a little hole in the middle, pour a little water in. This is distilled water, and observe how it readily mixes, unlike tap water, which has impurities in. And distilled water can always be substituted by rainwater, or it could in a clean climate. I'm trying to get this into a thick paste. This is a muller, and the glass is ground glass, and the longer one grinds, of course, the finer the pigment becomes. Taking out all the little bits and pieces. That's about enough for this. And then this is taken up and put on the palette. And this is tempera. Of course, if you were making oil colour, you'd grind oil in it, or any of the varnishes, balsams and so forth. And Terner would undoubtedly work very fast because of his consummate knowledge, which I wish I had myself, of the many hundreds of paintings he worked on in shipping, landscapes, seascapes. And I'm using distilled water and freshly ground turpentine, tempera. Just making a few arbitrary tones to kill the warmth in the picture and at the same time retain the luminosity of it. He would soften the effects by stippling with a sponge. One can see the advantage of having a sturdy easel and a sturdy person to tap it out, but this is the way it was achieved. And although it looks accidental, from experience one knows that one is killing these colours gradually. So we kiss this very gently. Allowing in the mind always to remember that you can rectify mistakes very quickly with tempera. And in fact, I really believe it was used by many old masters much, much more than is given credit for. Because once it's varnished, it takes on the physical appearance of oils. It's only by analytical chemistry you can tell that it isn't, in fact, oil paint. The next stage is to give the tempera a coat of varnish. Since the last stage in the development of this painting, I am redrawing some of the masts and upper parts of the ship because we lose them as we paint the sky. To draw a fine line in painting is one of the most difficult things, and it is best achieved by painting the area with varnish, varnishing it, creating an oily surface upon which you draw your line with tempera in a brush called a sable rigger, so called because it was used for drawing fine lines in rigging. The varnish should be tacky, and this is the only way you can obtain this line, which you can just discern with this is about as fine as any line could be drawn, and by the molecular structure of the tempera allied to the oiliness of the varnish, the thing as I speak is closing and will be finer in a few minutes than it was when I drew it. This painting has now achieved this condition purely with tempera, aqueous paint, and has been given a coat of varnish, which makes it appear to be oil paint, but it isn't. And now I'm going to glaze transparent washes. We start this time, instead of light to dark, the light underpaint into dark, to dark first. And here and there it's necessary to pick up a smaller tool to do the smaller areas. Warming and cooling. And of course in the flag, which is the white ensign, there's a touch of red which could be put in here. And the reason for that is red is an advancing colour, and a spot of red, as even Constable learned from Turner, I should imagine, a spot of red will send the greys and blues back. It's a good excuse to put a little more red there, even on the funnel or the mast. Like there's a flag on here somewhere. All this helps to bring a little touch here and there in the water. Where the light from the sun strikes the side of the ship, it's necessary to create in all buildings, all forms, the phenomena of the light part in the side of a building, or in this case in the side of a ship, is brighter. It appears to be brighter upon the edge, like here, closer to you, and gradate off, allowing the belly of the ship to go away from you. And to help the drawing, we warm the side of the ship there, which is in fact the forecastle, where the sun's hitting it. And these little marks intersposed in the right direction, right places, begin to create the feeling, movement, structure of the ship, gradating slowly. The beauty of oil paint is the ability with which one can gradate with it. You can't do this easily with tempera. In the drawing of water, and when we say drawing we mean painting and drawing with the same action, it's a very good idea to remember the volume, the depth, the strength, the fearful qualities of it, especially at sea. And Turner would be well aware of this, having tied himself to a mast to witness this in one of his famous paintings, Snowstorm at Sea. But we're not doing sea, we're doing the dirty, turgid water of the Thames of those days. And a little impasto, and let's call it a sun colour. And on the tip of each imaginary wave, as the sun meets the water, we go zigzag because of the movement of the ships causing the water to go left, right, left, right, left, right, diminishing towards the sun until at the far horizon It's a knife edge thick. All this can afterwards be rectified when you stand back and see the effect, if it appears to be in any way wrong, and you won't get it right every time, no one can. And this is one part of it. And this part has to relate to the mass of foam being caused by the tug coming through the water, which in turn creates this. One of Turner's favourite cloud formations was the cirrus, the lighter, happier clouds that are in the evening sky usually, in the early morning. He always got up very early at dawn to say hello to the sun and said goodbye in the evening, probably with a sherry. He drank a bottle of brown sherry a day to help him on his way. And in order to achieve the cirrus, for which he's most famous, he'd use a round sable dipped in a heavy media and roll it in a semi-transparent, heavy movement like that, according to the painting, keeping it going round. And by doing this, although it appears heavy at the moment, he would remember the sun would be warming the underbelly of these little clouds, so he'd put a little warm ochre in. It's very important because it gives us a chance to scumble. Scumbling is a method of painting used where opaque paint and semi-opaque paint is placed over glazes or impasto to create aerial perspective. Now, this movement is just done to illustrate the fact that the sun shining up under the bellies of the clouds, over and across here into the smoke, and the smoke will verge into the clouds, and that is more or less sufficient to demonstrate. And this would be stippled out so that the scumble goes into the glaze, softening. Both scumble and glazes soften. This is why initially the vernacular points of colour are placed down thickly with a palette knife, strongly, with tempera which will not, once it's dry, will not move, to allow for this process. So one can, with confidence, scumble out, soften the sky. And of course, Turner could go on glazing and scumbling and glazing indefinitely in order to achieve a softness and sharpness of effect, but always remembering that the sun was the source of light and of great importance. This is just a sketch, and would probably take another 2 months to do the rigging and so forth, because although it's glazed, scumbled and things like this, we need time for the rigging to be put in, as in this one. And even then, that isn't, of course, perfectly achieved, because this has to have a coat of varnish. And, of course, this picture was painted roughly, I think, 3 years ago. Turner, in the mixed media of painting, would have had to varnish. Nearly all the old oil painters and tempera painters had to varnish, because some paint sinks in and others will be tarred and so on. And it's only by a coat of intermediate varnish that you achieve a total unity to give you a chance to see. And this is called oiling out, and is as much as I can do for the moment. And I'll work on the picture in the future. Thank you.